Welcome back. Day 3. I'm ranking the video games I played in 2024. My friends did a little tier list, and I decided to make my tier list. It's a bit different. They're not really based on enjoyment, they're based on how good I think the game is able to tell their own story. Starting at the bottom here, we have Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. I was really excited for this game, but it kind of disappointed me. The puzzles, first half of the game was very cool. You're trying to get a bunch of echoes, you're trying them all out, and then eventually every single puzzle just sort of devolves into either use your strongest echo, keep using the water block to traverse everywhere. Sometimes you need an electric one, or sometimes you need a fire one, and it got very boring. I really liked the beginning of the game where you only had a set amount of echoes, 3, and then you could use the bed's length, and then the trampoline, which would bounce you up high, and then the too tall shrub, and you have to use those in combination. I remember there's a pillar in the starting area with a heart. It was a challenge to get it, but aside from that, the puzzles I felt were fairly simple. You could almost skip rooms sometimes, and I'm not a big fan of this be creative new Zelda formula because I think that just makes every solution sort of efficient and doesn't really bolster creativity. I would rather the games have difficult puzzles with only one way to solve instead of a million ways to solve them, but there's going to be one faster option. So I wish I enjoyed it more. The story was fine, no complaints there. Overwatch, I dabbled in it a little bit this year. The game just has so many shields. It's just really annoying to play. You too many shields, and you're just waiting for your ultimate to come up, and it takes too long. And yeah. The next game is Astroneer. It's a crafting type survival game, but the next game is Scanner Somber. I thought it was going to be much. I thought it was going to be much more engaging. It's a sort of a horror type walking simulator where you have a scanner and you have to scan your surroundings, and then that's how you're able to sort of tell distance. I think it's a really cool VR game, and you get jump scared like 2 times in the game, and then it's only a short game, like 2 hours. You get jump scared 2 times. It sort of keeps you on edge. You get jump scared, and then there's like nothing that happens for 40 minutes, and then you get jump scared, and there's sort of nothing that happens, and then the ending is sort of a letdown. So the soundtrack is pretty atmospheric, it's pretty spooky, but at the end of the day, it's still a walking simulator, and I wish it had a little bit of something. Crisis Core, I played at the beginning of the year. Crisis Core, I played almost at the beginning of the year, February, March, and it's sort of a prequel to Final Fantasy VII. In my opinion, it's worse than the Final Fantasy VII remake. The most important character is Sephiroth, and he's just sort of suddenly becoming evil. It doesn't make much sense for me. Hopefully, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth sort of sheds some light and expands on that, but the gameplay is worse, the story is a bit more confusing, and the cutscenes are always cool, but they add a bunch of characters that sort of aren't important in Final Fantasy VII, except for Cloud, of course, and Sephiroth. But the rest of the characters are they just sort of die, and it's kind of weird. The game right here, this should be Spark 3, actually, not Spark 2. Switch these two. So Spark is it's like a Sonic clone, but it does a lot of things good. Spark 2 and 3 are 3D, and Spark 1 is sort of 2D with some like combat elements, and it's really engaging. The story is good in Spark 1. There's way too much dialogue, and the writing is awful. There's no debate about that. It's really bad. But the schmovement is good. There's just what separates Spark 2 and 3 is that Spark 2 has a smaller, less annoying story, and Spark 3 has just way too many cutscenes that you don't really care about. And I think there's boss battles, which are kind of fun, but they're okay. So for Unexpected W, we have Astro's Playroom. I bought a PS5 at the end of the year. I've only played Astro's Playroom and a little bit of Shadow of the Colossus, but Astro's Playroom really sort of highlights the best of PlayStation and sort of made me excited to play a bunch of other PlayStation games. It has all the the different PlayStation IPs as little characters, videotaping. It's very cute. It's very cute. It's very fun. Spark 1, 2D combat, pretty good. Almost, if you like Sonic Mania, I would recommend it. Although there's more sort of combat elements. And another unexpected W is Steam Engine Simulator. It's a very simple game. You might only play like 20 minutes of it, maybe less, but it's a good simulator. You add steam, you add water, you add change the pressure. It's a good learning experience. It has a bunch of achievements for you to sort of get to. There's one achievement where you just leave the steam engine running for like 20 hours. You know I got that one. But aside from that, it's just a good simulator, and I was pretty surprised. In the good tier, I feel like they were good games. I sunk like 200 hours into Elden Ring, like 150 into the base game, 50 into the DLC. They're both very good, but I feel like I would enjoy the game more if I was able to sort of switch weapons and try them all out. I think Elden Ring's a game where it really shines if you take a certain path, you discover one item, it gets really good, and you get a bunch of buffs. But every single item is so displaced in the world that you end up wanting to try them all out, and then the game sort of narrows you into you have to pick one build, you have to build a bunch of vigor, you have to build a bunch of strength, you gotta use your stones, smithing stones, on one weapon only, maybe two, and it sort of detracted from my enjoyment of the game, which was just exploring everything, finding all these bosses, and discovering that one cool weapon that you could try out, that one cool talisman. But eventually, there's only like a certain amount of talismans that really work with your build. And I did beat every boss fight except for, what is his name? Moog? No. Radon. Golden Boy Radon. I did use a mimic here. I was a bit frustrated. That boss is kind of, I don't want to say bad game design, but it's a little bad game design when all you see are flashing lights. It's a bit of a seizure warning too. But I do think it's a good game. I still think they're both great games. I think Mesmer was my favorite boss fight. Hammer Bros for the win. I think it was a great mace. I can't even remember. I think if I played the game not trying to discover every single thing, I may have enjoyed it more if I stumbled upon a bunch of different things. But there's so much stuff online that tells you you have to get this for this build, you gotta get this for this build, that if you try and explore the entire Elden Ring game, or if you just try to do the main story, it sort of feels incomplete both ways, where you can't enjoy everything because it narrows you down into one path, and you can't have a good character unless you sort of go online and look at all the items that work well with that one build. That brings us to Chrono Trigger. I think the oldest game on this, most highly regarded. I've heard it's the best RPG of all time. Do I think it's the best RPG of all time? I have the Xenoblade art books. But no, I don't think it can top Xenoblade in my tier list. It's very good, has a diverse cast of characters, they all have their own story. Story is very, very RPG. You have to fight this giant calamity. It's very solid. The time travel is really cool. I guess my only complaint is sort of that it's an older game and it doesn't really tell you boss health bars. I ended up going online and looking at a lot of guides to see how different bosses' gimmicks worked, because they just don't really tell you that, and I feel like the game would have been much more difficult if certain bosses didn't really tell you how to beat them. But I still think it was a good game. The art is beautiful, music's beautiful. Yasunori Mitsuda, bam bam. Big success. Now we're going to the Psycho section. Peak, you could say. These are games I really enjoyed. They all have their own unique style and spice to them. Starting on the last part of the list, we have Yuppie Psycho. It's a Resident Evil style game where you're a new employee trying to discover this weird corporation. It's a quirky game. The story sort of doesn't make sense at the end, but it's pretty interesting, and if you like that sort of game, I would try it out. The boss fights are super interesting, and the pixel art is delightful. Paradise Killer is a bit of a sort of a different game. It has PS3, PS2 graphics. It's a detective game. It's a really cool game because you can end it whenever you want. It doesn't tell you who the killer is at the end, so you really gotta take your time with it and sort of discover every single thing. I don't think I got it completely right. I think I killed an innocent person, but the story has one suspect, and then that suspect changes, and then that suspect changes, and it really throws you off if you don't discover the whole thing. So I recommend it. Naruto Boy is a bit of a weird one. It's kind of a harder game, a 2D platformer. It has some story elements that I honestly don't think make the game better. It's a bit goes heavy into the whole techno isekai sort of world and loses the plot a little bit. But the gameplay is fun and the soundtrack is also very retro and sounds really nice. Citizen Sleeper was my was a bit of a surprise pick for me because I don't really like turn tabletop games. Although every single time I play a tabletop game, I end up having fun. But I think it's usually because it's difficult to explain the rules. Citizen Sleeper is very cool because it's not a tabletop game. You can't really mess up in terms of the rules, and it's a cyberpunk game. You're a broken and busted robot that wakes up on a space station trying to figure out where you are and what you're doing. And I don't really want to spoil it, to be honest, but you roll dice, and then those dice are your actions. You roll larger die, you get better odds, and then you sort of progress the game RPG style until you can reach an ending. What I did was I sort of hovered between the ending and the DLC, and I just didn't really know how to end. So the gameplay sort of got to a standstill for me, and I just wanted to be done. So I just ended the game. It was unsatisfactory, but I still enjoyed it. The vibe is very good, and the characters are also quite nice to find. Quite nice. The game involves a lot of reading, so if you're not into that, I wouldn't recommend it, but I still think it's very good. And the last on the list I have Nier Replicant, the remake of Nier from 20 or so years ago. Nier Replicant is really fun. It sort of feels like Elden Ring, but the combat is a bit more fast and hack and slash type. Although I guess if you raise the difficulty, then everything sort of becomes meat shields. The story is really good, and honestly, it really surprised me. It was sort of a different style of RPG that I'm used to, like Chrono Trigger. All RPGs sort of have you end up fighting God at the end, and this one's kind of not so different. But the way the way the way we got there was a bit different. I'm curious to play Nier Automata and maybe the Drakengard games and sort of see how the world builds upon itself. But the soundtrack might be my favorite of all of these. Yeah, so these are the games I played in 2024. None of them, they all sort of stood out in their own way, and I'm excited to play more indie games. Elden Ring multiplayer is coming out. Xenoblade X is coming out. So it's a good year for games. It's always a good year for games, no matter what people say. People are always creating new things. So if you like this video, please let me know. Tell me what games to play. See you. Goodbye.